All right. Is that my intro? Is that my PVK intro? All right. In re-listening back to some of my live streams and things that I say, that's how I say, all right, let's rock and roll. All right, all right, all right. Sorry about clearing all my throat. That's what happens when I'm pounding coffee in the morning. I need to clear my throat. Is there a song? Let me clear my throat. All right. Silence the phone. I would say that I'm a little bit inspired right now. I didn't know I have the space to do a live stream, so I decided to do it because why not? This is part of my process. It's part of my thinking. This is kind of what's going on inside my head all the time. Symbolic space. Hello. I know you, Phlebas. Dude. So one of the things in the description, maybe you don't want this kind of promotion, but Phlebas, I appreciate you. There was a love stream last night on how do you even say it? Christian Golden's channels, Gia or something. Is that what it's called? It was great, and a lot of it's in my mind right now. Uh, so one of the central friendships, relationships, people in this little corner for me, and somebody I've known for a long time is Shari from Dayup. Gur morning from Dayup. What? I don't even know what that means, my brother, my person, my friend, my guy. Yes, the love stream, dude. That was stellar. It was very stellar. Really great conversation last night. You were there, my buddy. Mitch Caps is here this morning. Hell yeah. Um, it was really great. The whole conversation was great. It's a lot of there's some of the navel gazing of what is this corner, people telling their stories, all that kind of stuff, which I think is important because you have to wrestle with those things, wrestling with a name. I was thinking about to discern the spirit of a thing, right? And discernment and testing the spirits. What is that verse where it's just like, who knows the spirit of a thing, or who can search the depths of God but the spirit of God? It's the same with you. It's the same with anything. The spirit of the thing is what searches the depths of a thing. And toward the end of that conversation, Shari finally got her technology figured out. So circling back again, Shari, she's one of the people that I know the most and have known the longest and have interacted with the most in this little corner. I think we knew each other a little bit on the Bridges of Meaning. I don't even know if Shari and I interacted before Bridges of Meaning. Shari was around in the YouTube comments stuff. I probably did. I don't really remember. The conversations or the people that I can name then are smaller, but ever since the Bridges of Meaning became a place where we hung out, we always had this group, this direct message group of closer friends from that group. So it was like Job and Jeff and Shari and Shelly and a bunch of other friends. Sarah, I think Sam eventually came in there, but he was not in there initially. So it was all these close friends. Shari was always in there, and so she popped onto this love stream last night and said some things that I think are very deep wisdom. It's actually connected to stuff. I would say it's the same thing that I was talking about in another of my live streams where I was talking about bodies and they went out from us because they were not of us and what makes a thing. and Shari brings up this line, or it's not I think it's a line from Lewis, but it's just like you can't understand something by vivisection because you kill it. So with analysis, if you're trying to understand something by breaking it apart, it's like trying to understand life or what unites a thing by diabolos. So she brought up the idea of enchantment and disenchantment, and somewhat disenchantment is the killing of a thing. So when you hyperanalyze something, you disenchant it. You take the magic away, the sacred magic, the sacred is it sacred language? Is that the term that she used? But it's from a chapter in Tomberg. She thought of it in terms of Tomberg. But this is very connected to what unites a thing, and unity and multiplicity and being. I mean, it's philosophically whatever, the one and the many, that problem. Shari spoke about it really well from Tomberg last night, and she was saying what is kind of happening in this little core of the internet is you can try to, by trying to figure out what a thing is through reciprocal narrowing or however you want to talk about it, you can disenchant the thing and kill the thing. By trying to understand something, you can actually destroy it. And and that's what happens, because when the spirit of a thing leaves, the spirit moves where it wills. You can see neither it's coming nor it's going. But when the spirit leaves, you can tell that the spirit's left, because people leave. The multiplicity that made up the unity of a thing. So like bridges, she used bridges of meaning as an example. To some degree, like bridges of meaning died in a sense. I think a lot of it's still going, but it's different, and it's become very propositional. And a lot of the people that were originally there, that a lot of the people that constituted the multiplicity of that unity, what that thing was, the body of BOM, a lot of those people left. And the reason that a lot of those people left is, like, I'm not very active there. I mean, sometimes I pop in there, but is because the spirit left. It was disenchanted. The magic that made the thing a thing left, and so then everything fell apart. The religio, the ligaments, the thing that bind something, that hold it together, when that breaks, when you break a ligament, the joint pulls apart, and you no longer have the unity. I got on my channel, so MJ, who I often see in the Unitarian, who we got into the fundamentally people, credo precedes credo. Like, you always need both. It's often a confusion. I'm not anti-creed. I'm not. You have to say the appearance of the name or thing. The only thing is the mystical unity underneath or behind the spirit. And spirit and law are related. The spirit and the name are related. One is more. One is primary. One gives the other. Although in time they're simultaneous. Spirit fundamental. I wouldn't say prior, but it's fundamental. So, Mike. Oh, it's because so it was weird, and now it's not weird. Fixed now? Better, or do I need to unconnect it or something? Yeah. Still. Okay. Let's do this then. So I took out my headphones and then I was muted. Good Lord. I need a audio tech person, or I just need to have a more clue. I'm assuming you can hear me now. Can you hear me now? Can you describe what you were saying in a series of tableaux? No. I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing. A tableau is like I'm assuming what you're talking about. If I'm understanding you correctly, that's like a mosaic vision. That's what I'm always doing. That's how I'm always explaining myself. But I think a helpful thing, this came up in a live stream that somebody was saying. Well, it was probably in that same live stream that's in the description from Apologia. I had just a bunch of people drop off because because no one could hear me. What did I say that everybody missed?
I gotta get my hemp rocks up here. I'm a big fan of hemp. This is like a mirror thing. Also, like figuring out how to straight razor shave uh, in a mirror is hard. Um, so, oh yeah. So what came up in a live stream that I think is important to remember is that a lot of times people will say, they'll say something that they've thought about or contemplated a lot. Sherry was also talking about this at the end of the of Christian's love stream last night. That Tom Berg says that a lot of what contemplation or even thinking is, part of the fullness of your thinking involves contemplation, which is internal. Jordan Peterson, I think, described it as, uh, which reminds me of another thing I need to go back and revisit about what thinking is. But he described it as almost like a splitting of yourself. At least modern thinking, modern consciousness thinking is this way, where you almost have to like divide yourself to have an internal dialogue to be like this or this or this, and you debate back and forth, which is kind of what contemplation is. And that involves a kind of splitting in order to do that. But then also part of thinking, there's you can do it through different kinds of technology. You can do it through writing. That's a different kind of thinking. It's a different medium, which brings about different uh, relationships. I mean, you could think about this in terms of morphic fields. Writing, the technology of writing, and that medium is its own field. And so when you're doing your processing through writing, it's going to have a different flavor. It's going to have a different texture. When you're speaking different languages, I'm not bilingual or multilingual, um, but I've interacted with many people who are. Uh, like in my old BOM group, Andreas, who's not really involved that much in this anymore. He's still on the BOM, but like I haven't seen him on YouTube in forever. But he was around all the time, a good German friend. Um, and he would say that like thinking and communicating in English, he would say is way different than German. And I'm sure people that are multilingual have that experience. And this kind of verbal processing. Chris McDonald spoke about that, waves of obsession, in a video that he just put out recently because I had left him a comment to which he replied, "Thank you, Chris," about his process of writing versus audible processing, voice memos, live streaming, speaking to someone out loud. A lot of people, and everybody has gifts, everybody has skills, everybody has talents. Like I was talking to a local buddy on the phone last night, who uh, was talking about this, and he was talking about the idea of maybe like in the Twin Cities estuary, actually doing like a local live stream thing. So it would be like if I could find a number of people from my local estuary who wanted to do a recorded live stream conversation. So it would be kind of a hybrid, right? We would be having a conversation with each other, but then also live stream it just to I don't know, play with that, try that out, which to me seems like kind of a fun idea. Um, but processing out loud, like what I'm doing right now, I'm interacting with the comments a little bit, but in this beginning section, I'm not really interacting with the comments that much. I'm just interacting with my borderline schizotypal multiple personality mind, where I just have all these different things going on. And because I have high enthusiasm, high extroversion, like my local buddy was saying, he can't do this, but I can do this. Yeah, Neil, I'm setting the frame to start. I'm just throwing out all the things that I'm thinking, which even if I can't name it and make it explicit, there's an underlying unity. There has to be, which is why all it's connected. Like I wouldn't be going here and here and here. If there was no connection, I wouldn't be going here. It's just often people that are more schizotypal, it's very broad. It's extroverted intuition. So I see like a very 30,000 foot view. I've always been that way. And so there is unity, but sometimes it's a hard to name unity. And I also, back to the Sherry live stream conversation thing, this is the difficulty of naming, right? And bodies, and naming is framing, is that when you name something, and this is happening in the little corner, right? Once a thing is named, the possibility of disenchantment happens. Until it's named, you almost can't disenchantment, or you can't exercise the spirit, right? But once the thing has been named, then you can exorcise the spirit. I mean, this is tied to the history of exorcism. Like once you figure out the name of the demon or the spirit or whatever, then you have some degree of power over it where you can exorcise it. You can kill it. You can do that with positive things too, which is the disenchantment, I think. Um, all right, let's see. So one of the things, so I want to talk about, so that's kind of one thing that just is a random addition, which I'm sure is connected to where I want to go with this. But also, I wanted to touch on a few things that I asked from like a poll, just a question on my own channel, my YouTube channel of topics to discuss. So Chad had a couple topics he wanted to discuss, and then someone else I can't remember. Sorry. So two of the topic, one of them was forgiving God, and I saw that as just kind of like honesty. And then I've been thinking a lot about the prodigal son or the prodigal God, as Tim Keller calls it. And then someone else wanted to talk about men's work, and I think all these things are connected under the auspices or the umbrella of honesty. I think and self honesty or authenticity. You know, Paul likes to talk about. I don't even know what he means. Authenticity versus pro-felicity. I haven't thought about it that much. That framing, but authenticity. I think we often think about that in terms of like what I call divided man. You know, the inner and the outer world, but it's always both. That's why I say like the person is the nexus or the nexus and the locus of all meaning, is because you can't separate the person from perception, perceiver, perceived, inner, outer. The person is the meeting of those two things, heaven and earth. So the person is essential for being. That is really why I say like the whole if a tree falls in the forest doesn't make a sound. No, if no one's there to hear it. And I think what Berkeley was getting at by saying that is like everything exists within the mind or the perception, the person of God, which is in him we live and move and have our being, or panentheism, Phlebas. Oh, Phlebas, it was you asking about men's things. Okay. The subject is a joint point. I kind of like that. I think that's probably true. So to me, all of this is about the person, the necessity of the person, the centrality of the person, or as you could say, Christ, the only existent one, as we say in the Orthodox services leading up to Pascha in Lent, in Holy Week. In him we live and move and have our being. The person, and I would say Jesus Christ is the fullness of being. And then fractally, you are the fullness of being, which is why you have the God of your own understanding, but you also have the everything of your own understanding, because all you have is your own understanding. And the modern mind often likes to separate that into the subjective and objective, but to me that's a false splitting, because it's both of those. It's always both. It's not an either or. It's both end. And so, and to me that is honesty and conscience, and it's the integration. I often think of these in terms of two big verses is how I think about these. Jesus in John 7, I think. I always forget if it's 6 or 7, but the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is full of light, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is one, but if your eye is divided, your body will be full of darkness. So you have to have integration in the inner and the outer, and within yourself. You have to tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And Dostoevsky says, especially to yourself. Father Zosima says that. And so, and to me, how I want to illustrate that is the story of the prodigal, and then that will get into men's work too, I think, and forgiving God, and the Psalms, is because you can and you can't trick yourself into being somewhere you're not. You are where you are. And part of that is like your own body. So like one way to illustrate it in a physical way that I think will help people understand, we do this intellectually all the time too, spiritually, but like physically. If someone is like overweight and out of shape, you can try to lie to yourself and say you're not. And then you can try to lie to yourself and say you're going to do all these kinds of things that you're not going to do. But the reality is, like, you're not going to do those things. So, like, honesty is being true to yourself and not lying to yourself about where you are and what you need to do to get to where you want to go. And so, like I've heard Chad talk about this in regards to, and alcoholics I think know this. This is all great um, alcoholic stuff, because like you can lie to yourself that you want to be sober, but you don't actually want to be sober until you start actually getting sober. And everything else until then is like lying to yourself, much to do about nothing. You need to be either integrated or rock bottom. Rock bottom is where you have no other choice and you're essentially dead. Like it's the bottom of the U-shaped journey where like it's that choice kind of where like you're either going to die, like kill yourself by drinking yourself to death, or commit suicide, or stop drinking. And you've really realized that. You've stopped lying to yourself that I can keep doing this and somehow get away with it. Like there is no other choice. That's the rock bottom as I understand it. And then you can actually recover. But until you get to that point, you're lying to yourself that you want to be sober. You actually don't yet, which is why you're not getting sober. And then Chad was talking about that in terms of like smoking. Like he knows he should quit smoking, but he doesn't yet know as he ought to know, or else he'd quit smoking. And he would say, yes, I could like lie to myself and pretend that like I want to quit smoking, but I don't because I keep smoking. You know, it's the Roman 7 thing. Oh, wretched man that I am, why do I do the things that I don't want to do? Why do I not do the things that I want to do? But the things that I don't want to do, I find myself continually doing. Oh, wretched man that I am, who will save me from this body of destruction? Praise be to God. That is the true and the false self, the flesh, the man, what we are called to be putting off. We are called to be putting off the old man and putting on the new man, which is Christ, the white stone name, the true self. That's the duality. That's the duality and non-duality of who you are. The false self that needs to be annihilated in all the different forms of hell that are true. I say this as a Christian universalist. And then the true man that is purified and redeemed by the exact same thing. Um, but there's no point in lying to yourself at wherever you are in any of those processes, as it applies to anything: drinking, smoking, eating well, loving your enemy. Okay, get into the prodigal. So the prodigal son, the one who chooses like, Father, give me my inheritance now, because like I don't want to wait till you're dead. Another way to say that is like, you're essentially dead to me. I don't care about you. Give me my inheritance because that's what I want. So that I would argue that's the prodigal's false self, but it's more honest with who he really is in that moment. He wants the inheritance and he wants it now. And so he gets it, and then he goes through his whole Ecclesiastes thing. He pursues all the things that he needs to pursue because he needed to. Because he needed to get to where he was, right? He had to do that. You could say, because I don't believe in this counterfactual world where like he didn't need to do that. He did, because he did it. So he was somewhat more honest with himself, even though it was his false self. And he pursued all this stuff to realize like, oh, my false self isn't giving me what I really want at a deeper level that I didn't even know at that time, even though I was being honest about it. And he's with the pigs. He sees the end of it fully. He hits his rock bottom. And then he's still not understanding the father, says like, maybe I can just be a servant in his house. And he goes back. The father hikes up his tunic, comes running to him, because the father's always, that's always the father's disposition. Always. And so he begins to discover his true self. But he had to be honest that whole time. You know, he had to be honest the whole time. And I've always resonated more with the prodigal. If you need to rebel and you need to be honest with your false self and live that way, then you need to do it. Like the more conservative types and the more legalistic types and the people that feel, because it's all about safetyism, the people that feel more safe in order and structure are always going to tell you not to do that, and they tend toward legalism. But the problem is like, if you're doing legalism for the wrong reasons and you're denying Because this is the older brother, right? The elder brother. The elder brother did all the right things, but not because he loved the father, because he wanted the inheritance. But he just did it by a different mode. They both wanted the inheritance. It's just the older brother was living in self-delusion, I think, because his false self really just wanted all the stuff. They both had a false self, right? Wanting the inheritance, not wanting the father. They just had a different tact and tactic because they were different people. They have different temperaments. The prodigal was a chaos monster. The older brother was a conservative legalist. Neither of them loved the father. The point is loving the father. And there's different roads to get there. And both of them involve killing the false self, dying to the false self, and discovering who you truly are, ultimately, I would say, as the image of God, Christ in me, the divine spark, in Judaism they call it, the only thing that is proper being, which is the only thing that has life. That's the true you. That's the white stone you, I think. And so forgiving God, this is where I want to go with that. Forgiving God, and then I'll do men's work quick. Forgiving God is, so like, right, here's a Sunday school answer. Is God ever in the wrong? No. However, that has zero legs and is impotent to help you, because sometimes in your experience of life, are you pissed off at God? Are you angry with God? Do you not like your situation, your circumstances, what has happened? Do you feel like you've been, Job, do you feel like you've been wronged? Do you want to know why? Why are you suffering? The thrownness of life, like Grimm, life is a life sentence. Brilliant. Do you feel that way sometimes? Do you feel like, I want out of this? Like whatever I'm experiencing right now, I want out of it. Anything to get me out of this. Well, ultimately, if you believe in some kind of universe, God, call it whatever you want, nature, reality, whatever, you can be mad at your, you can feel like I didn't choose this, I don't want this, and yes, whatever. Are you being the victim? Are you outsourcing your agency? Are you not? You can do all the kind of mental gymnastics you want to like deny the deep reality that you're just mad at God. You can trick yourself out of that. You can tell yourself a bunch of narratives to say I'm not really mad at God, but again, in your true false self, like the prodigal or the elder brother, the true false self, does that make sense to anybody? Are you still actually really pissed at God? Then you know what God wants you to do? He wants you to say that. There's a lot of Psalms like that. Why was David a man after God's own heart? Because he didn't bullshit God. He told God what he felt. Like, was he like being, is that the secret sacred self? It's just honesty. It's just honesty. If you're pissed at God, imprecatory Psalms, do you wish your enemies dead? Maybe you should say that. Should you want your enemies dead? It doesn't fucking matter. Like it doesn't matter what the right answer is, the Sunday school answer. This is why I say there's a difference between thinking you ought to believe something and actually believing it. Actually believing it, where you actually are, is honesty. It doesn't matter if you know the right answer. Like when you ask a bunch of little kids, adults do a very tricky, veiled, confusing, I would say two-faced, and not intentionally two-faced. We just do this because we're all ignorant and wounded and we don't know ourselves as we ought to know. But adults do a very tricky Sunday school answer of like, what's the answer? Jesus. Adults do that shit all the time. It's not helpful. Like, it doesn't matter if you know the right answer. You can be right and be wrong, or be wrong and be right. The prodigal son was wrong. What he was doing was wrong, but he was right because he was being more honest to where he really was. The older son was right and he was wrong. They were both wrong. You can err on both sides. So like, It doesn't matter. And very often, again, like I've learned a lot of this through Jonathan Haidt, through temperament, through the Big Five, through Myers-Briggs, through Enneagram. Different people are different people. I am by nature a prodigal. If I don't want to do something, if it doesn't feel authentic to me, I'm not going to do it. I don't care because in doing it I would be I would be lying to myself. I can't serve God and lie to myself. Um, you just can't. It's something. It's beyond your will. You can't control it with your will. So that's prodigal son. That's the prodigal son, the elder brother. That's forgiving God. Do you need to forgive God? Yes and no. It's one of those things. Yes. If you're angry at God, tell Him. And then, do you need to forgive Him? Yeah, sure. Um, and then men's work. So I put in the notes, Illuman. I went to this Illuman conference, which comes out of the work of Richard Rohr. I have a buddy, my buddy Dan, shout out Dan, who's been reading the book Iron John. I don't know a ton about all this men's work stuff. Like I've just barely scratched the surface. But this book, Iron John, is key to a lot of men's work. It started, what is it? There's a guy who came to our local estuary a couple times ago who wasn't as familiar with Little Corner stuff, Jordan Peterson stuff, Rebecca Peugeot, but he was familiar with, what the hell's the name of it? It predates Illuman, I think. I can't remember the name of it, but it's kind of it's less spiritual. Yeah, Bringer of Light, Lucifer. My name's Luke. Isn't that funny? Yeah, Luke, Lucifer. It's all the same thing. Bringer of Light. Satan. So, does anybody know who wrote Iron John? I don't want to look it up right now. What is it? My buddy Dan was sending me. Whatever. So, this book is kind of the catalyst for a lot of modern men's work. And my understanding of what a lot of men's work is it's men-specific groups where women are not allowed because they just can't be. You couldn't do the kind of men's work that needs to be done with women there. And do women need the same kind of thing? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know if there even is that sort of a thing. I think men need spaces so part of what it is, there's structure, there's boundaries to it, there's rituals to it, there's things that you do before it. You set the perimeter and bound of where these men are meeting. I think I just spit on my computer. That was gross. Absolutely, Chad. Thank you. I am kind of both. Sorry, Graham. I don't read all the comments because sometimes, okay, I will read this comment. You can be Luke and be light, and be Luke and be dark. True. Thanks, Chad. For people that are just listening. Chad also says you should check out Theodore Roosevelt to do men's work. But in Illuman, for example, what I have a small amount of experience with is you set these perimeters of things. So you physically set a circle, and then you come in and then you do some rituals, either with and all this stuff seems really wooey, but guess what? Rituals are kind of wooey. It's just how it is. You gotta just embrace it and get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then there's like this particular group that I did it. They had a talking stick. So like one of the parameters of the men's group was that you could only talk with the stick. And so the leaders of the group start, and you maybe have some prompt questions. There's a lot of prompts that you can have. But then there's just certain parameters. Like one of them is no crosstalk. It's really similar to a lot of AA stuff. So like when someone is talking, you can't talk and interact with them. You just listen. It's a really good balance of masculine and feminine energies, actually, and hospitality and openness and walls and structure and breathing in and breathing out and giving and taking, and it's a good balance of all those things because You talk, but then there's no crosstalk. So you don't like cross-examine. You can't like ask a lot of questions. It's okay to do sometimes, but really the thing you're there to do is to listen. And so someone else will talk, and usually there's a response. Everyone will do some sort of a response, which I mean it feels weird and culty, but like all those things are really natural. It's just the natural symbolism that we're used to. Like Peugeot will talk about this. A normal conversation has these things. And he says, if you don't think a normal conversation has ritual and structure, the next time that you're just talking to someone, lay down on the ground, face down, and continue talking to them and see how the other person reacts. Well, they'll just what will happen is the spirit will leave, the enchantment will be broken because the ritual has been broken, and people will think like you're crazy, and the conversation will diabolos. You broke the ritual, and so diabolos will happen, and there'll be a splintering. The spirit will leave, and the conversation will break down because that's weird. And the reason that's weird is because you broke the ritual. Well, you can do that in a circle. You're doing the same kind of thing, and everybody. So someone will share, and everyone will say something like, "Thank you for sharing," or "Thank you for your words." Um, and part of all of that is you're creating a space of non-judgment where people can say, and trust me, people will say the most intimate, deep stuff. Like I got together with these guys that I'd never met before in this one weekend, and we had some of the most intimate conversations I've ever had with human beings, where people shared stuff that I'm sure the maybe the majority of people in their daily and family lives don't know, and it was because of this structure. It was so unbelievable, and men just openly crying and weeping together. Like, I think these things can be incredibly, incredibly healing, but there needs to be the structure of trust and non-judgment and listening and affirmation, hospitality for this kind of stuff to happen, or else it won't happen. This kind of thing is actually a huge. So like, to Phlebas, to your question about men's work is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I just don't know how to go about it in my daily life, and in Minneapolis, I don't. There's probably ways that you can do it in the ways that they hold like AA meetings online, but I don't. But honestly, I don't have interest in having more online relationships and interactions than I currently have. Like, I want to do this. I want to interact with the friends that I really have in this group, but largely, like, that's it. I don't want to add to this because, and part of that's because of my wife, and not just her. I think there's wisdom in that. This is enough, and this is okay. I'm not in a place of judging this and hating it, and living in this again, this lie, this disintegration with myself that like I shouldn't be here, but I really want to be here. Again, that's back to the whole prodigal thing. Like, be honest with where you're at. I want to be here, so I'm here. If I didn't want to be here, I wouldn't be here. And I can tell myself I shouldn't be here. It doesn't matter. Again, right? Um, so the men's work thing is something I'm really passionate about, but I only have so much bandwidth. I only have so much time. My wife and I often talk about it in terms of like Venn diagrams of overlap. So I have church, I have my kids, I have kids' schools, I have kids' activities, I have my friends, my relationship, my family, all these different things. And so, like men's work, I'm full. My life is full. And so, the men's work somehow is very important, but somehow it has to fit in there. Twin Cities Estuary is important to me. I want to continue to be involved in its, the seeds that are being sown there and whatever is starting to grow, and we're trying to discern that. I want to be involved in all of that. And so how does men's work incorporate into that? I don't know. Because like art, so I'll be just so we have one. Mandy is theoretically, who's in here, listens sometimes. Mandy is theoretically in our Twin Cities Estuary, but she's too far away to come to the in-person meetings. I want more women involved in this, in my local estuary, in whatever. I like women. I've joked a lot about that I'm more masculine than a lot of the men that I know and more feminine than a lot of the women I know. I Once me and my wife went out to a patio where there was a women's book club happening next to us, and I could barely be present with with like my wife and a couple that we were there with in this patio because I wanted to be in the women's book club so badly. I'm part of a book club here in Minneapolis that has a bunch of guys in it. My wife's part of a book club. I'm honestly sometimes envious of her book club. Sometimes I'd rather be in her book club. But me and my wife need to keep those lines. I tend to like groups of women or groups where there's a lot of women involvement because women are more relational. Guys like ideas in and of themselves, or like they'll start talking about politics or whatever, and I don't give a shit about that stuff. I don't. I'm an anarchist. I kind of like talking about it, but ultimately, I'm an ENFP. Ultimately, I like feelings and relationships, and that just tends to be women centric. But why I love men's work is because it's not a denial of all that stuff. All that stuff. I need to shut this down and invite people in. When you are with men in a men's group and they're vulnerably with vulnerability, they are sharing these deep wounds and trauma. That is men. Again, men also are feminine. Women have masculinity. Men have femininity. In men's work, men are allowing the depths of their. I should just read some of these quotes of Iron John that my buddy was sending me. You're letting these repressed energies that you often experience, that you just in modern culture you find no expression for. Because here's the thing: there's like a deep animalistic masculinity in men, like the kind of wild ape-like guttural hairy like that's in men. Where do we find expression for that? Like you can get like the bro manosphere culture. You can like go do jujitsu or lift weights or do whatever, and all that's good. But like that. I think that's a and maybe and do that fine, but it can be a band-aid on a deeper thing. Like you really need to get in touch with your deep masculinity. Like sometimes men are pissed at things and they want to like kill people. It's honestly like I don't know if anybody follows MMA. I follow MMA. Like you right? Pacifist. Follow MMA. Psychoanalyze me. Sean Strickland, this guy who's like not PC at all, was very abused and has lots of childhood trauma, white trash. I love this guy because he's breaking all the categories. He's a chimera. How do you make sense of him? He's simultaneously very open and vulnerable and transparent because that's kind of that culture. Like I don't know what you call it, Scotch Irish hillbilly thing. It's like me. Like I'm gonna tell you what I think. First percentile politeness. Sean Strickland is like that, but often what that is not PC. And he also he's damaged, but yet he's vulnerable. He's just awesome. He's just awesome. And so men need to get in touch with all that. They need to hold space for people, though. They need to be that's part of that non-judgment and hospitality. That's getting in touch with your femininity. Weeping together, like a true man weeps, the gift of tears from Loris or within Orthodox tradition. Like I'm a very weepy man. Jess, I love Jess Purviance from this little corner who does all the Job stuff because he is like a weeper, like that kind of guy. Sometimes I'll start talking about stuff and cry in this. Like I can't talk about a hidden life and not cry. My daughter, who's not emotional at all, will be watching movies and I just cry all the time at movies. Like I just bawl my eyes out. What movie did we watch last week? And I'll cry. I usually cry more than my wife, but very often me and my wife will be crying. And my daughter's always like, look, all our kids, like they'll just be like, they can sense when a person would be crying during a movie and they'll just all start like looking over, just waiting for the waterworks to happen. It's kind of hilarious. I cry all the time. I love crying. I'm an Enneagram 4. Sadness is like my love language. And it's not even sadness. I actually tell people I'm the healthiest when I'm crying. I tell my wife that. If I'm not crying on the regular, something's probably wrong. Like I should be crying a lot. It's how I am. So I don't know. All that's men's work. I flipping loves men's work. I don't know how to fit it into my life. So I'm gonna copy this thing. This is long. This is more Luke rambling than usual. I'm gonna put the yeah, this is hilarious. So, Marielle, you are right that you don't need psychedelics. Yeah, I don't think I do. I think I'm just I think I'm just there all the time. Um, dude, I know McMo too. I believe it. You I can sense this. I'm an intuitive. I'm an empath, and I think I just see stuff. I know you're a crier, dude. Chad's a crier. I relate to men who cry. I need men that cry. I I love feminine men. And by that I don't mean like effeminate men. I love men that are in touch with their femininity. It's so again awesome. I love it. And part of that's temperament, but a lot of that is just like the kind of men who have ego who don't want to cry. My dad is a crier. He's a big crier. He's not self-aware and conscious of his femininity, but it's there. Like he'll bawl at Hallmark movies. Like my dad is a hard person. He has been my whole life. He's kind of been the scapegoat of our family because he's a hard person. Um, but he's also like a true man's man, amazing human being. He's the kind of person that most modern men who like don't work blue collar jobs and who aren't tough have no idea how to comprehend what kind of a man my father is. And he sacrificed a lot. He's got problems, but he sacrificed a lot for my family. When I was really young, he was an iron worker. He was like a connector, an iron worker. And I'm gonna just talk about my love of my dad for a while. And dude, Christian, you do this. When you talk about your dad, it really hits me. And for people that don't have a dad, that make or the people that only knew their false dad, the false self dad, that breaks my heart. So my dad was an iron worker. He's like people have probably seen the pictures of New York where they're building these giant iron buildings, and like the guys who are at the very top of that, who are connecting the beams with like bolts and those. Maybe nobody's seen these giant wrenches. I grew up seeing these because my dad had them from his ironworker days, where it's just like a pin on one end almost, or it goes to a point, and then it's just like a giant wrench on the other hand. They're like, I don't know how heavy they are. They're probably like 20 pounds. They're huge. But like they would go up and they would jack that um, little thing into like where a bolt would go until the connectors would come up with these giant bolt guns and like and work all these things together. And my dad was at the very top of these things. And this is before OSHA. This is before there were like safety nets and harnesses and all that stuff. So these guys would just climb. My dad, who has hands like flipping vice grips, he still to this day, and he's older, but like when he was younger, so, like, quick aside, when he was younger, my dad was really into wrestling, and he didn't have wrestling at his high school until he graduated. But he was big on all of us wrestling, so I grew up wrestling. All my brothers wrestle. I came from this big wrestling town. And me and my brothers, we'd always wrestle with our dad, like rough and tumble play, like Peterson talks about. And my dad would let us do it to a while, but like it was rough. It was hard. Like he'd hurt us. And he would let us wrestle with him until he just got sick of us for a while, and we'd both attack him. And then all of a sudden he'd like grab us with one of his hands, like somewhere on your wrist or whatever, and he would just like squeeze you until you were just like, okay. And you'd have to stop because if he wanted to, he'd just break your arm. But he would just squeeze you to the point where you'd quit. But we liked it. And then he'd let go, and then we'd be like, okay, it's neutral again. And then you just like run and attack him. Um, so my dad used to climb. He would tell stories of like what they used to do. It's like, does anybody know? Do people know what an I beam is? People probably don't. So like, think of the letter I like this, but like a giant. You're looking at the end of an I beam of this giant piece of metal. So like, and these giant size skyscraper type buildings are like power plants, which is what my dad worked on. They'd be connecting those. But to get to the next level, a lot of time, if you weren't waiting for the crane, they would just climb like a vertical I beam. So they would grab the edge, like one part of the eye, and they would just put their feet, their rubber soles on it, and they would just climb up it. like just by the grip strength, just able to climb, packing these tool belts and stuff. And then they would do that all day. My dad would tell me these stories. They'd do that all day. And then my dad was an alcoholic when I was younger. And they'd go out drinking at night, and then they'd go to the gym after working all day and go lift weights and do stuff. And then they go out drinking all night and get like a few hours sleep, and then get back up and do it again. And so like all iron workers were hard, but like the connectors were the most hard. And they were just like, they were at the top of the hierarchy. They were like the baddest guys. And like, I mean, just like think about like in the 60s and 70s in Eastern Wyoming, like it was just wild. My dad's like the Marlboro man, right? I say all this to talk about how tough my dad is. And then we moved back to South Dakota, Western South Dakota, where I grew up on a cattle ranch. Western South Dakota is just hard. Like right now it's cold. It's like Minneapolis is cold. It's 0 degrees. But I remember times where like my dad would go out feed. We had a cattle ranch, so feeding cattle. So he'd have to go out and put hay out for the cattle, unroll these round bales or square bales before we had round bales because we didn't have enough money for a baler because I grew up really poor. And he'd go and he had a cabless tractor. So his tractor had no cab on it. So just the wind is hitting you. So the difference between Minnesota and Western South Dakota or North Dakota is like, it's the plains. So like, not only does it get to be like -20, but then add on to that like 40-mile-an-hour winds and drifting snow. And so my dad would go out there without a cab to feed the cows because he had to, because if he didn't feed the cows, we don't eat. And then you're calving during winter. So you're going out and the mama cows are giving birth during the winter and you have to go out and watch them because like if something goes wrong with the birth and the calf doesn't get up and doesn't suck, like the calf will die. Well, guess what? If the calf dies, that's $500. And when you're poor, like, like that's everything. I've seen my dad give mouth to mouth to a newborn calf on our kitchen floor, covered in afterbirth, throwing up because like because he had to. He had no choice. People like my dad, he's essentially like a homesteader. Like we watch a kind of movie like The Revenant or something. My dad's like that hard of a guy. He's like the Marlboro man. It's not just like he's not the kind of guy bowing out his chest pretending to be tough. He's tough. He's tough. I've never seen anybody work harder than him. One more story about my dad, and then I'll move on. People can come in and talk to, but like my dad, I remember the first time. So then he worked multiple jobs. He worked 2 jobs usually to make the ranch work because there wasn't any money for the ranch. The ranch wasn't making money, and he inherited debt from my grandparents. And so then he would work 2 jobs. So he'd usually get up and work a job before like doing other stuff. But he started doing construction, general construction, and I grew up doing that with him too, helping. But one of the jobs we started doing we'd shingle roofs all the time. So that was basically my first job, was like carrying shingles and stripping roofs with potato forks. Nobody knows what any of this stuff is. A potato fork is like a 3-pronged pitchfork, but they're really firm and hard. It's not a hay fork. And we would use those to strip off the shingles off of a roof because they wouldn't catch the nails because there's only 3 prongs, but they were tough enough to rip up shingles. And when you get a roof with like 4 layers of shingles and you're just like, trust me, like if you're on top of a roof trying to stay on the roof and just stripping shingles off with a pitchfork, and then all of a sudden your pitchfork just like hits a nail when you're just like powering through a swing and it feels like you're going to rip your shoulder off. It's hard work. And then we'd carry all these shingles and then we'd lay shingles and your fingers would just be like bleeding. And my dad had like no tolerance for weakness somewhat. He'd call, like if you'd sit down on a job, he'd call it jackrabbit's disease, where as soon as you stop moving, your ass hits the ground. Like he called it jackrabbit's disease. So the first time we ever got like air nailers, because these didn't exist when I started working, or we didn't have enough money for them. But I remember the first time we used an air nailer on a job. It was me, my friend Brigham, who was also a hard dude. I could tell a lot of stories about Brigham. I mean, I grew up in Western South Dakota. Like, there's just a lot of hard men out there. You did not want to get into a fight with Brigham. Anyhow, I remember we had 1 air nailer and 1 hose, 1 air compressor, and my dad And he was just confident, kind of cocky this way. And he said, "You guys start on this side of the roof. I'll start on the other side, and I'll meet you at the top." And my dad just did it with like his pouch where he had hand nails, and he would just nail with a hammer. And I don't know, he either met us at the top, so he's laying his own shingles by himself and hand nailing them, while me and the other guy are. So one guy's laying shingles, and the other guy's nailing, following him. So with a machine, it's kind of like, is that Iron John? The story of like the railroad guy? Big John. Isn't it Big John? There's a great old country song about that with this really deep bass guy. Big John, Big Bad John. Which is a song I used to because all my dad listened to was like 60s and 70s country western music. So I know all these old country western songs. And it's awesome. I'm thankful. So my dad like met us at the top. He's just like, I don't know. What you see in here depends a lot upon where you're standing and the kind of person you are. This has always been, I've been a staunch defender of my dad and my family because my dad was also an angry man. And he was just he expected a lot of people. He worked very hard and he had to. And he sacrificed a lot of himself to do that. But then he always had a lot of pressure and anxiety because he was just working so hard. And so he always felt like, will people please help me? Like, so imagine me as a little kid. I'm like I am, but imagine me as like 10, 12, 14, immature, um, space case. I'm in my head all the time. I'm imagining things like somewhat of, I'm so heavenly minded, I'm of no earthly good. And then my dad is bringing me along to help him, like bring him tools or do whatever. And I'm just like not half paying attention, not really listening to him. So he'll be like, go get me a 3/8 socket. And our tools are not organized, and I'm going and looking, and I don't even, at the beginning, like I don't even really know what a 3/4 socket is. Like I was probably not even really listening to him. So I'm like, did he say 3/8 or did he say 3/4? And then I'm looking and I don't really know, and I'm scared because like I was always scared to make him mad because he was mad a lot, because he was stressed out a lot, because he wasn't sleeping and working himself to death. He had a hard life. Nobody had any grace for my dad growing up, unfortunately. I don't know, it just makes me so sad. And like I get it. I was scared of him most of my life. And so I bring back the wrong thing and he'll just be like, and like that was always a dynamic. But like so like you can, in retrospect, I have a lot of compassion for my dad because I look at that moment and as a little boy, I'm just thinking like, you could say like, oh, you're being an asshole to a little boy. Sure. Uh he was carrying a lot of weight, like there's just, it's really easy to again, like Cal says, to stand outside the fire and judge anyone, judge my dad, to just be like, well, because this is the whole idea that Cal has of like, well, if I were you, if I were in your place, I wouldn't do that. That's not true. Because if you were in their place, if you had all the constraints that they've had on their life, you wouldn't do differently than them because you would be them. This is that. Dude, Chad, I would love you to interview my father. I want, my dad's so cool. Uh, so what was I saying? So it's like Loris. Yeah, that passage that I read out the other day in a live stream. At the end of your life, you'll see there's really only one path. That doesn't mean you don't have choices. That doesn't mean you're not culpable for your choices. But it is what it is. It's the prodigal son and the elder son. Could the elder brother been the prodigal or the prodigal been the elder brother? No, because then they would have been right but wrong or whatever. Like you have to be true to who you really are, because you can lie to yourself and deny that, but it's no good. All right, I'm gonna go back and look at some comments. Did I put the link back in? I think I'm done telling my dad stories, because at some point here, all I'm gonna do is just sit here and tell my dad's and just cry. Which, whatever. I mean, if people just want to watch me sit here and cry and not be able to talk, that'll be fine. um. So my dad was the first person in his family to go to college. He's the toughest guy I know, and he thinks he's a sissy because he's got multiple degrees. Yeah. Uh, my mom went to college, but she only went back to college and finished college after I had graduated college. I'm the only person in my family who went to a 4-year college. Some of my siblings did like what's it called? Associate degrees or like vocational schools. But yeah, I mean, I don't come from educated things, from educated stock. John Henry, is that it? Yeah, dude, that's a in the modern technocratic world, we've lost a little touch with the world, with work, with whatever. That's why people go out. Like my wife talks about this sometimes, but like people do what's it called? Like sound forest therapy. Where like people go out in the woods to try to uh, regain their sanity. Which interestingly, that's the most recurrent theme. I just say I came from no stock in reading Frankenstein. If you When you read Frankenstein, to me, that's like one of it just blew me away when I read it. It's the first book we read for my local book club. But like, so Dr. Frankenstein is not the monster. The monster, Dr. Frankenstein is who creates the monster. But one of the things that happens in that book, it's a pattern that happens over and over and over, is Dr. Frankenstein is starting to like lose his mind and just and spiral. And then he will go out to nature, he'll go take a walk in the woods, he'll go back to a lake or something and regain his sanity. Isn't that amazing? And Frankenstein is like, I think, our first modern horror story, first science fiction kind of thing. It's a really interesting book to read and think about technology and sanity and a lot of stuff. And now we're trying to integrate like float tanks, sensory deprivation tanks, ice baths. We're trying to engineer what people used to just have by nature. Like that's like my dad. You try to tell my dad something like when I was younger or something like you should do like a ice bath. And he'd just be like, why would I do that? I'm out in the freezing cold all the time. Chad, okay. I love my father, deeply flawed, not a great example, but a good heart. Yeah. Chad, you have a great perspective on all these things. Like everything is a blessing if you receive it as a blessing. I once heard Pete Holmes say, who's this comedian I follow and listen to sometimes, that there's it's a Buddhist saying, I think, but like it's the kind of idea, but it's very connected to like C.S. Lewis and Paralandra, like I will eat it all, like whatever God brings me, whatever reality is, like I will accept it all. Like St. Paul, whether hungry or full, whether enslaved or free, I've learned to be content in all things. Uh, there's only one reality. It's the light of creation. It's the fire of God's creation and existence. And like if you are in opposition to that, it's going to feel like hell. And if you are aligned to that, it will feel purifying and redemptive. There's one reality. Um, Embrace it. Uh, yeah. Garth Brooks, man, I could sing you a lot of Garth Brooks song. Chad wants, what is the song, The River? I think I sang some of The River in a live stream once. Send him my email. My dad, I don't know. What's funny is I've talked to Paul about, or like thrown the idea to Paul about, I would love to interview my mom. I've asked her a couple times for like something like this to just be like, I think it'd be fun to talk to my mom about, well, this is my own, about me, about her relationship with me. Because if you can imagine, my mom is a very conservative, evangelical type woman. But she's a very prayerful woman. She does a lot of Bible stuff. Bible studies. She really cares about this kind of stuff. But I mean, truly, she thinks I'm kind of nuts. I mean, you know, uh, she she just all the different iterations of my faith and the things that I think and often the things that I say. I mean, she's just like, she loves me, but I mean, I don't even know if she really thinks that I'm a Christian. I mean, I don't know. I just think it'd be fascinating to interview her and to talk to her about, as like someone from this little corner of the internet and as somebody who's in this world, to talk to her about that, what she thinks about that, what does she think about my theological journey, my intellectual deconstruction, all, because she's just not in that world. She's somewhat in like she just sees it all as like unfaithfulness. I think I've gotten to the point, me and my mom don't really talk about these things anymore, but I think I've gotten to the point where I could actually talk to her about it in a better way. Like that Michael Polanyi quote I always like to talk about doubt and belief. I think I could use things as a springboard to explain things to her. But like, this is the problem that those guys were talking about earlier, is that, you have these shorthands for things. So I say things in all these shorthands. What you see and hear, like that. What you see and hear depends a lot on where you're standing and the kind of person you are. You could talk about that for like that sentence or two sentences. You could use that as an icon to explain all of philosophy. Probably. I mean, close. And so, like, what I'm saying when I'm saying that, I've said that for the whole time I've been in this little corner, but I don't think people understand the depths that are there. I don't think they get it because I've thought about it for a decade or more. I mean, when's the first time that phrase or that sentence becomes salient to me in The Magician's Nephew from C.S. Lewis? I don't know, probably. And I probably read The Magician's Nephew 2 or 3 times before that popped to me. So, like, there's no, again, it's mammon. This is why I'm so big on the personalist knowing. I cannot just hand you the depth of meaning that I mean by that phrase when I say it. I can't just give that to you because there's nothing in you to perceive it. There's nothing in you to apprehend it, which is why I love that George MacDonald Lilith quote and why I say all meaning. The person is the locus of all meaning. You can't, until you're ready to know what I mean by that, you're never going to know what I mean by that. And that goes for everything. So anyhow, I've thought about talking to my mom. I don't think my dad would ever do this. I mean, he maybe would. My dad loves me enough and we have a good enough relationship that if I asked him, he maybe would. I don't know. He would think it's weird as hell. Although Chad, you could probably bridge a lot of the gaps. I don't know. We'll see. My also send him my email. My dad doesn't have email. My dad's never emailed anyone in his life. My dad doesn't have a smartphone. He has a flip phone. He's really funny to talk to about. My dad's, how old is he going to be this year? This year he will be 75. Yeah. We're thinking about doing a 75 thing for him. He says sometimes people send, he at least knows how to see text now, I think, sometimes, but he's like, it's hilarious to hear him talk about people sending him texts because he can get them on his flip phone, but like he doesn't even know how to go into them. Like my mom probably has to go into them for him to see him, or she'll read them to him. He doesn't ever send texts. Like he doesn't know how to do any of that stuff. Yeah, Dave. So friend Dave says, I didn't really know my dad until I was in my 20s because I came from a broken home. Then for the last 3 years of his life, I became very close to him. He was radically different than I thought. Aren't we all? True and false self, man. It's always that stuff. Maximus, angel and demon, we're both of those things. Put off the old man, put on the new man. It's beautiful, Dave. Awesome. Dave says he's my best friend, really. That's wonderful. It's probably how it should be. More crying. Yeah. I can't. Well, it's not at my control, man. I'm not. I can't. I cannot. All the gift of tears, man. It's a gift. You can't mammon tears. A gopher. Yes, somebody who knows what a gopher is. That's absolutely true. My dad, I was the gopher a lot of times. Go for this, go for that. Absolutely, man. Ted was right. I don't know what Ted we're talking about. Okay. Also, if somebody wants to come in and talk, come in and talk, because otherwise I'm gonna go through these comments and probably shut it down. Because I mean, how long does anyone need to listen to just me talking? This is like what it's like to be inside my head, and you'll maybe eventually go insane. Um, yeah, there are two. Yeah, Dave, there are two versions of the book. There's a revised one, so that her husband, I think, helped do revisions on and things, and trying to figure out which one you want to read was. I think we went with the original. So, um, look at that, Friends of Friends with Pete Holmes. I met a guy actually at my Illuman thing who sometimes Kyle, who sometimes listens to these things, or he used to, but he's probably moved away from this kind of stuff. I don't know. I know he followed a couple of them who hung out with Pete Holmes once. I know that. Who maybe has his phone number. I don't know. Pete Holmes is one of those guys that I appreciate. I don't know that we would be friends. He's one of those people that like I would love to have a non-recorded conversation with him to just talk about his faith and history. I mean, that's because I know he likes to talk about it. He talks about that stuff all the time. I would love I would love to get to know Pete Holmes so that I can get to know Peter Rollins, because I know Pete knows people who know Peter Rollins because they both know Rob Bell and all that stuff. I would like I don't know that I would be friends with Peter Rollins, but man, I'd love to meet him. What a great guy. We barely know anything anyone, even those who we believe we are close. Well, I don't know. Hopefully that's not true. Part of that's becoming an integrated person and not lying to yourself. Because if you're an integrated person not lying to yourself, you're not repressing the truth and unrighteousness. Paul in Romans 1, I think. I don't think that's propositional. I think that's more I read that as much more existential. Not lying to yourself. That's really how I see Romans 1. And I think it's such a healthier way to understand it, because if you suppress the truth and unrighteousness, you're lying to yourself, and you're delaying your own transformation because you're not doing the things that you need to do to become who you are, I would say. But that's what happens with people when all of a sudden you're just like, something will happen, like marital unfaithfulness, or I don't know. There's tons of terrible stories from people we know and friends in Minneapolis. Like all of a sudden, there's this horrible story that happened in Minneapolis a few years ago of like a man's wife died, and then years later he ended up being tried for her murder, and he's in jail now actually. And it's a weird story. There was a whole like Dateline thing on it, where it's like somebody broke into his house, and then his wife ended up getting shot, and but they never found anyone. They couldn't really find signs of a break-in, and then you found out they were like very evangelically Christian people, and then you found out they were in all this debt. There was all these secrets that nobody knew about them, and hiddenness, and then like and ultimately, like, nobody really knows what happened. I mean, I think the guy does, who's in jail, but he's adamant of his own innocence, and I don't know, like that suppressing the truth and unrighteousness is horrible, man. Um, PVK, yeah, this is a great idea. I agree with you 100%. Like I said, I've pitched this idea. You maybe said this before I was talking about doing an interview with my mom, but I think it would be so fascinating for at least the randos who are willing and who are, I guess, as self-obsessed as I am, and or Chad, to like talk to their family members and to bring in that dynamic of it. I'm like a let's do it all. Let's share everything. Let's have it all on the table. That's my general motto. Um, I'm terrified of self-deception. So if I can say everything, stream of consciousness, thinking faster than my own head, I feel somehow to me that feels like you're getting closer to me, but that's not true because we're all just infinitely, you know, it's always just further up and further in or deeper in. You never get there. You never arrive. So yeah, dude. This is Unfortunately, this is a very common thing with a lot of people in this little corner, and with PVK in particular. PVK corner in particular. It's my mom and I don't have a good relationship, unfortunately. She thinks the Catholic stuff I do is wrong. My mom is also from Kansas. She's a Baptist. Yeah. I'm sorry about that, man. It's I think my mom feels similar about Orthodoxy. One thing I know for sure, and this was true the last time she was up here. We, what up, Neil?
What's going on, Luke? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I hope my mic isn't too jacked because I'm out on my morning walk
No, I think it's good.
in lovely New Orleans, Louisiana. Just wanted to say hi.
You're from Nolans, huh?
I'm not from here. My wife is, but they've made me feel like uh, welcome, I guess you could say. I've
Okay.
been here about 8 years.
I assume you know Theo Vaughn.
I've heard a fair bit of his stuff. I didn't. Is he from the New Orleans? I know he's from the Deep South, but
I think
I
he's
didn't know.
more, I don't know. Yeah, I think he's rural. No, he's from a
Yeah.
rural town, I think, from the way that he talks about it. But anyhow, I always think of him when Louisiana comes up.
Yeah, I lived in Wisconsin for 9 years, pretty close to Chad's neck of the woods. So I'm relatively well familiar with. But when it gets cold like this in New Orleans, it's so funny. It's like the whole city shuts down, and I'm just like, it's a normal day. It's just
So
nice day for a walk. Let's go.
how cold is it there?
27 at the moment,
Yeah,
which
that's
is
wild
I
for
mean
New Orleans.
that's balmy for Minneapolis in the
Yeah,
winter.
yeah, but it's what I mean. It's all relative, man. Truly, I mean, for down there, that's cold.
Yeah, no, it's true. I my daughter has only seen snow fall here once,
Mm.
and it was literally like half an inch. And I said, maybe in your childhood you'll get to see a real snowfall. And then I was watching Chad shoveling snow the other day,
Yeah,
going, "Oh, the good old days." Yeah. So,
it's snow's so much fun. It's like that's one thing I miss from South Dakota is the drifting because we would get sometimes you'd get no kidding like 20-foot drifts. And then they get hard because it would get so cold, and because of the drifting, it's pretty hard. And so we dig these elaborate snow caves and stuff. It was so fun.
oh yeah, yeah. Where I grew up, it was in a series of townhouses, and we were at the end of a parking lot, and a big parking lot with all the townhouses. And so the snowplow would come and plow all the way down the edge or the end of the parking lot, make a giant snow mountain at the end of it, probably 12
Mhm.
feet tall.
Yeah.
And man, we like when Tayo was talking about growing up with other kids in the neighborhood, I had the good fortune of having that, I think, because of this like townhouse development that I was in, where all the kids in the neighborhood would just come and we'd make all sorts of things in that snow mountain and just, occasionally it would collapse and somebody's like screaming for help, but there's enough of us around that we're pulling the poor schmuck out.
Yeah.
So,
It's all, yeah, fun. Good times, largely. So, what is your, can I ask you, and you can feel free to not talk about it for whatever reason, but like, what has been your family's response to your conversion?
well, my
Catholicism.
family has been Catholic, and so
Oh,
part of it, so for me it's been overwhelmingly positive, and you could say that uh, my conversion was just an inevitable consequence of being in the water. You could, and I'm sure there's a big part of that because my wife's family is overwhelmingly positive influence on my religious development,
hmm.
and just inviting me to participate in more and more things. Um, oh shoot, now I'm walking into the wind, so
I think
if the
it
wind,
sounds all right.
it sounds okay. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, no, that's been good, but I think what probably differentiates me from a lot of people in the corner is that a lot of them got to faith through sort of that upward. I don't want to say logically building themselves into faith,
Mm,
but but it was like a slow and steady process where they're extrapolating what they've learned from PVK and what they've learned from Peugeot and so on. Whereas for me, it was much more like, oh man, I'm in the dumps. Like this is not good. If I keep
yeah.
going this way, like this is not going to be good. And then I don't know what else to call it. I experienced a miracle. You know, I experienced something that if you told me the day before was possible without drugs, I would have said no way. It's that doesn't happen without drugs. And then once my frame, let's say that frame was shattered, so then I go into the desert, but it's like it's the way you the way you can only see God from behind. It's like, okay,
Mm.
if I start following this pattern, let's say, if I start embodying this pattern, and my life is just better. And not only, it's not about my life so much as like the ripples I'm sending out into the world are way better. And I can only see those ripples in retrospect, but it's like like what am I gonna do? Am I gonna say, oh, that was just luck and that was just me being good? It's like, no. Like there's no way I'm committing that hubris again. There's no way.
Yeah. No, I totally feel you. So you essentially have no kind of parental or family tension over your becoming Catholic.
No.
Yeah.
Um I mean, I'm starting to get much more involved in my local church, like a lot. And there might be more tension just over that because even and it, there is, I'm saying there might be tension in the future over that
Yeah.
just because of the time sink. Because if push comes to shove, what I'm sacrificing first is TLC. Like, no offense
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
everybody in TLC,
Yeah.
but you know, the Catholic Church in the New Orleans area, we're going through rough times. Like, there's 18 churches that are closing, and because you got to think of this as like an overwhelmingly Catholic
Yeah.
area, but it's probably about 30 to 50 years behind where like Quebec was
Yeah.
with Pajot talking about Quebec's
Uh-huh.
Catholic collapse.
Yep.
And so things down here, they tend to move a little bit slower, but we're the tail end of the dog, whereas TLC is like the nose end of the dog. And I'm trying to connect the nose to the tail, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean it's probably the American aspect of the Catholicism down there is like America's just more uh it's the Protestant aspect of it is more traditionally, at least in American, religious or conservative or whatever. Like that's that it's making you hold on more than Canada or Europe or something. Um, yeah,
Yeah, but
that,
there's definitely a meaning crisis down here too. I mean, you know, drugs and alcohol and the whole bit, you know, the whole nine
well, dude,
yards. So it's all there.
that's the thing is like there's meaning. Everybody, whether consciously or unconsciously, is going through some degree of the meaning crisis of like, what am I doing, or discontentment, or affluenza, or money's not satisfying. It's like the modernity, the way that Shari spoke about it last night in that thing, it truly is. I don't know. It's really helpful for me to understand it. It's like it's so helpful to hear other people say in their own words things that you think because it helps you understand what you already think better. And what Shari was just talking about is like disenchantment of how that leads to the disintegration of the body and the spirit leaves and then everybody leaves. Because this, once the spirit is gone, then the multiplicity just starts to splinter. Of course, that's just how things work, and that's the disenchantment. I think religion. I would argue Christianity in America, like propositional confessional Christianity, is just it. The spirit's gone, and it's just like happening slowly. Catholicism will maybe happen first, and then because my parents and I have this conversation all the time because they go to like a Southern Baptist church, and they're like, ours is growing, like it's just it's doing well. It's what's up, McMo?
What up?
And
Can
they'll
you hear
just
me
be like,
good?
our church is healthy, it's growing, it's good, we're having lots of kids, and I don't know. I try to suspend my own judgment, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think it'll be there in 50 years. I just don't think it will. But, God bless you.
Yeah, my parents go to the same evangelical megachurch that I got fired from, and so it's kind of interesting talking to them because there's certainly like an elephant in the room,
Yeah.
but they definitely kind of are saying the same things you were just talking about. Like we're growing, But then my dad also, because my dad's super pessimistic, probably more than me even, but he's like, no, it's a completely different church. Like all of the problems that were there when you were there, bud, are no longer there. So you can come on back whenever you're ready, kind of a thing. And that's hard. That's not so easy, especially when you're hanging out with so many ortho bros on the internet. It's like, yeah. What does this megachurch have to say about St. Maximus? So the idea I came on because I wanted to put past you guys is like, what's the relationship between rescuing your father from the belly of the beast when, like, because it's interesting that we were talking about dads, because like so much of this little corner is kind of like a wrestling with, I think, not so much of it's wrestling with it's daddy issues, and a lot like your home, like the church you were raised in, that you somehow like deconstruct from or fall away from or whatever. Like in this space, it seems like everyone is trying to go back into the fathers, even called the church fathers, your internet father, which is Jordan Peterson, or even just that kind of ideal masculine archetype that you wish to be, is like a kind of like a shadow patriarchy type of idea. And so I think that it's all very connected to like church of origin, family of origin stuff. And I've always had a great relationship with my dad. He's got his faults and the ways in which he could not be the perfect father. But like compared to so many other people's stories, I just have to kind of be like, good grief, I had a great dad, and I still ended up all messed up. Like it's still, you can have the greatest dad in the world. Your dad can be, we were talking about this. Jacob had a live stream like a while ago, maybe like a month ago now, but it was basically, the idea was like, there aren't really any good dads in the Bible. It's like name a good dad in the Bible.
Isaac.
He played favorites.
I thought that was his wife.
Well, but he went along with it.
Yeah, no, Joseph was daddy's little boy. It's literally like Joseph was his favorite.
God doesn't favoritism.
You're not a good dad if like if you're 11 of your sons team up on the youngest or the second youngest one and throw him in a well. You've made a fathering error there somewhere, probably.
Okay. I'm gonna make a case that Herod the Great, he properly allocated land to his 4 progeny. He properly allocated his resources. He took care of his own.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great topic. I love it. Mikmo, thanks for bringing it up. Somebody made that comment, I think in the live stream of that last night that I was talking about, to some degree this is true. Like we're just working through childhood issues, a lot of this. I mean, how could you not be? Like your religious you think your religious deconstruction isn't connected to your parents? Of course it is,
Well, and I've been wrestling even with that language of deconstruction, because there was a time in my life where I would have said like, oh yeah, I'm deconstructing right now.
Yeah.
But then now if I look back at my life, I'm like, I don't think I really even deconstructed anything. I don't think I took apart
no.
anything.
Dude, well, that's like that. I've mentioned this a bunch, but really, when what's the guy's name? Nate spoke with those 2 guys about Bulgakov in that conversation. The way that he talks about deconstruction is perfect, because he's just like, and it's very in line with my Polanyi quote that I like to do all the time. Doubt is just belief. Doubt is belief in not that. So he's like, if you're talking about deconstruction, it's just like the progression and evolution and maturity of your faith, then cool. But most people think of deconstruction as like a loss of faith. That's not what it is. So
yeah, I think
some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't you think it's not popularly used?
Paul, can you name a good father figure
in the Bible? People would argue
Jesse?
Joseph, but we know almost nothing of him.
Oh.
Jesse, maybe?
Yeah.
David's dad?
Father. What's that? Jesse?
Yeah, David's dad comes to mind. I can't think of anything blaringly bad that he did.
Left David in the field.
Yeah, we don't know a lot about him either. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
left him in the wilderness to
the
fend for
fathers we know a
himself.
lot about, not a good track record. David himself, one of the worst fathers of the Bible. Samuel, probably not a good father. Eli, probably not a good father. I mean, there's this tradition in the Old Testament about, really important fathers and the fall of their sons. I mean, Solomon didn't turn out that well. Rehoboam was an idiot. No, it's true.
Joseph, man, Joseph and Mary. I hate to say
Hey.
it, but
Yeah.
old
Well,
Saint
yeah,
Joe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true. That's probably the one. A great father.
I thought of him too, but Jacob was never going to accept that.
Well, we know nothing about Joseph. I mean, that's one of the things, except he was a good man. But beyond that, from the Bible, we know nothing of Joseph. And I'm sure there was plenty of fan fiction written about Joseph.
Listen, I've seen the movie The Nativity, and he looks like a great guy. So.
Well, and it's interesting too. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it's interesting too, to bring the other TLC mainstay Sam into the equation. It's like the idea of the Old Testament God being God the Father, quote unquote. It's like maybe we call him that because it's a definition by contrast kind of a thing. It's like what all of these guys have failed at. There was this overarching success in the whole narrative is God kind of fathered reality, or fathered the narrative arc of the children of Israel. I don't know, just trying to somehow connect it.
It's I loved listening to you this morning, Luke. It was so good, and I even think about my father. My father was not a hard man at all. He was a very gentle man. My grandfather, very kind and gentle man. My father was a big man, and worked on farms and stuff. So very strong, could be very physical, but of course his job wasn't. But there are other ways in which my father, in terms of paying attention to his children, mom carried the load. And so it's, but at the same time, listening to you, Luke, yeah, your father had his flaws. What father doesn't have their flaws? He was still your dad. You still loved him. And some of the really interesting contradictions that are in you are because of him.
Totally. Yeah.
And you wouldn't be anywhere near as interesting a person as you are if it weren't for him. You're a very interesting person. You really are. I wouldn't keep watching these live streams if you weren't an interesting person.
He's in my top 5.
I think, yeah. Well, part of that is because I said once in one of these little corner conversations that, because I was trying to explain my parents' relationship, because I have no idea how they got together. But I mean, besides that, they were in the same vicinity. Like my mom was working, helping the iron workers in Wyoming, and that's where they met. And somebody said, Nate said, like, my dad's older. My dad's like 10 years older than my mom, actually. And I'm sure she was very young, and he was like, a stud. Like he was just a jacked, wild man kind of stuff. And I think that's how they ended up together. And it wasn't, and my parents have had a complicated relationship that I don't want to air all out here. But I said something like, I have no idea. It's so weird. I can't explain how you put two people like that together and how it works. But like, that's how you end up with somebody like me.
Yeah. Did you read Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights?
No, I haven't, but I've heard him talk about it a bunch. His family there's a lot of similar.
It sounds a lot of what you're talking about. Hard, very muscular, very, manly man, evangelical woman. Those two often and it's a difficult pairing, but it's not an uncommon pairing.
Dude, my dad is such a baller. Like, I'll just tell another story about how tough he is. So he and how much of an asshole I am. So we had these our stairs, we had this giant. So my dad hunted, like he went elk hunting once. We had this giant elk head above my stairs growing up, like huge, like humongous. It's probably like in Boone and Crockett, like record level, or it would have been, but it had a little velvet on the tip. And so we'd walk down under that elk on the stairs. But then every once in a while, one night, he went down the middle of the night and somebody had left like some magazines or something on like the side of the stair. And so like he hit that and just like foot went out from under him. And so like he spun and like there was a little bit of a duck, but like when he spun and hit, like he just drilled his head on this, and rolled down the floor. And then we had a wood stove, because we had a wood stove that heated our whole house with all this like uh what's a gray stone or whatever. Anyhow, we built it. We like pulled him off of this creek bed, and he rolled down there and hit that. And then in the middle, and everybody kind of woke up and heard this commotion, and I walked downstairs, and I just saw him because we heard all of a sudden. So we heard the commotion, it's like Saint Nick or something, and then all of a sudden you just start hearing this, and we just walked down the stairs because like he basically like knocked himself out, I think, more or less. And he's just laying, and I come downstairs just like laughing my ass off. Like I just thought it was,
Of course you did.
Hysterical. And
you were Moses' son that got cursed.
Oh man. And then so it wasn't exactly this story, but I think his knee once got kicked by a cow and just kept and like ballooned up. So it was like collecting fluid. And it got to the point where like he couldn't walk, he couldn't move it. And he's like, well, and we like didn't go to the doctor because we didn't have money and stuff. So then he just took like a cattle syringe and just like himself just like stuck the syringe in his knee, and he would just pull off the fluid from his knee so that he could like bend it so he could go back out and work. And he'd almost like pass out. Dude's just a baller.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And no,
my father's parents had a similar dynamic. Sorry, everyone.
No, that's good. Hard men, man.
I'm gonna go back on mute.
Well, and it was life. My father also grew up out in the prairies and in farm country. Now, his father was a preacher, but as a young man, you work on farms, and so it's just hard physical work. Have you seen Tough as Nails on Paramount Plus?
Uh-uh.
My wife and I are almost done. We've been binging it. It's a reality TV show, but it's all about, they basically get 12 blue collar workers out there, and instead of Survivor where they're sort of nitpicking and eating at each other, they're trying to accomplish these tasks. They've got them pouring cement, they've got them building stuff, they've got them putting stuff together, fixing stuff. And it's a little campy, but it's heartwarming, and you do get instead of usually reality, the women they often pick women who are better looking than average, of course, but for the most part it's heartfelt, and it's fun to watch the trades. And I when I was going to college, I worked in a lumber yard, and those were good years. I loved, the contractors and the guys who worked in the yard too. I mean, they were good. And my kids didn't get that.
It's probably campy because actual job sites are campy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Luke, your story of your father, and like when you say like he was a hard man, and he had his flaws and this and that, it gives me hope. And also he's a bit older. Anne's father is like, hey Christian, Anne's father is in his, I think he's like 72 or something like that.
Yep.
And he's like that too. He just has a flip phone, and he doesn't like music really. He doesn't watch television. And these guys are like, it gives me hope. If I have children, I'm not sure if it'll happen, but if it does, because I'm afraid that I'm going to be an asshole, like a bad father, because I have like this bad temper, and that's one of the primary concerns.
Chad, you're gonna be a lot like me, I think, because I have a bad temper too, which came out the other day. People got to see that and the just chatting. I don't. But part of that's my dad too. Like my dad he would have it in regards to work. Like he had no tolerance for people that weren't working their ass off. I have no tolerance for people that aren't working their ass off relationally. Like I don't like bullies. I don't like it. And Christian, I know you're similar. Like I'm not a violent person, but like I don't like to bully people, but man, there's part of me that would love to just beat the shit out of a bully.
Would you say that you're bent on justice?
Yeah, it just depends
Injustice?
on
Yeah.
it's not even, I mean, that's a tricky word in these little corners, obviously, but I'm very I don't like people that take advantage of perceived weakness or vulnerability or anything like that. I don't know. And I mean, you have to keep in mind that like bullies are their own, it's the hurt people thing. And very often, if you trace back, what's going on with a bully, I mean, how many stories? Like their home life is just an absolute disaster most times, And so a lot of troubled kids, that's that MMA fighter, that Sean Strickland guy I was telling you about. Like his whole interview with Theo Vaughn is unbelievable. And there's that middle section where like he just breaks down crying and Theo just kind of sits with him for a while. It's really good. But like he talks about how troubled he was going to school and like when you just hear his story of what was going on at home and then how that translated over into school and like getting in fights, he was probably considered like a bully bad kid.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it was.
But he was just like, I don't know, he's just a scared little boy,
Yeah, I've had a lot of moments publicly in the groups that I've been in where like you had on the just chatting where like if I see something and nobody's saying anything,
Yeah.
like I cannot help it.
Yeah,
What will happen is I have like this voice that comes in and be like, dude, just let this go because you're not the sheriff. And then I'm like, dude, shut the up because I'm gonna smash this shit right now. And then I do it, and then I feel terrible for it.
Yes, Chad, we're like the same people in so many ways because I'm that way too. Because I'm often thinking like, okay, there's not a lot of women in this space because women would never put themselves in this kind of situation the way that all y'all are talking. There's a lot of guys who wouldn't put themselves in this situation because of the way you're talking. There's a lot of people who have a certain temperament that would never stand up to you. I have first percentile politeness. Like I have no problem standing up to people. There's part of me that really likes it. But yet, yeah, but then afterwards, then my neurotic 88th percentile compassion, same as you, feels bad. Like I shouldn't have said anything. And then I should immediately go back and apologize. And they're like, duh. And then I was talking to people afterwards, after that whole thing. I was talking to Cal and Jason. Like I should go apologize. And they're like, no.
They said no. Yeah. No, I'm right there with you.
No. It's and part of it's part of it's the male-female thing because the bullying thing is interesting in schools which are predominantly run by women. It's like, okay, no bullying, but part of the difficulty is that on one hand no bullying, but on the other hand also no whining.
Yeah.
What you said about your father with the jackrabbit, that's hilarious. And no whining, oh, but no. We're not going to have you bully, but we're not going to have you whine either. And, and like you say, Chad, in a lumber yard, boy, you start whining.
Yeah.
That's the stupidest thing you could do is start to whine because everybody's just going to pile on your misery.
Dude, and that's such a thing for me. Like so you were talking about being a dad, Chad. So here's the positive that from my experience, if somebody has older kids, they'll work that out. That's been a struggle with my own kids because there are things that my kids have done, and I don't know, what came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know. Like, is it just cultural? Is it part of the fact that we're not as poor as I grew up? There was just my dad had no tolerance for wine. None of me or my siblings would ever whine to my dad. Like you can't even imagine. We were scared of him. You're not gonna whine to something you're scared of. Like he'll be like, we're gonna go fencing all day. Are you kidding me? You're tired? You're gonna go dig post holes all day. Like it wouldn't even. But like my kids have said stuff to me where I'm just like, it puts me in this place of where like I don't I don't know how to respond to it because I'm just like, if you'd have said that to my dad, he might have killed you.
Well,
I don't even know how to compute what you're saying to me right now.
Neil and I, when we were talking with Teo, we got on, we tripped over the topic of lunch bucket that Jordan Peterson
Yeah.
talks about.
Yep.
That's such a tricky topic because, like, I very much identified with the lunch bucket character, and like, and it's so hard because, like, like Paul, you just said, like, no whining, but it's like it's hard not to whine if you have a pattern of whining, and like and so learning how to banter is not easy, and especially if you have patterns of perceived injustice for a long portion of your life. So it's hard to just like talk yourself into, like banter does not come easy to me. Like I have to, like uh like on a job site, I can't tell if somebody's like really being a dickhead to me or if it's banter. And so, like, if I start to perceive that this dude is really like going after my character, I'll lose my shit. And I'm the same way with, like, when some of the other characters around here get to talking like this, I'll just like it's hard for me to perceive. But man, it's so I think that these are all issues. Part of what I think is funny is the hypocrisies that we all have, and I think, like, a lot of us that do land here, not all of us, but a lot of us that land around here were people that weren't going to be picked to play on the kickball team. and now we don't. Now we want to try and gatekeep and make sure other people aren't picked up for the kickball team. So it's like this strangeness where it's like, come on, guys, like, but yeah, no, and I think, Paul, not to pat you on the back and all that shit, but we do thank you because I think you give us you show us how to, even though a lot of myself is not temporary, I don't have the temperament that you have, but I watch you and I'm like, oh, how does he not like just smash this son of a bitch, and like, so the more I'm able to watch that, I can try and emulate that, but it's difficult. So we appreciate you for encouraging us, and we know, I think we have an idea why you highlight some of the stranger characters. My perception on that is because you're showing all the other people, if you decide to step into this space, these are the weirdos you're going to encounter.
Yep.
And that's good.
Yep. And so I got an email yesterday. I always get these emails now from, there's these companies out there that if you want to have a podcast, you pay them to go nag people with bigger podcasts to get you on as a guest. Like, these are out of the Philippines. So I got an email from this person. It's like, oh, there's blah, 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 blah. And he'd be a great guest on your podcast. I usually ignore. And then they keep sending me emails. And then I get to a point and it's like, all right, I ignored you. I ignored you. You don't want to be ignored. All right, I'm going to tell you exactly why your person is never going to be in my podcast. And, I did this once to a telemarketer at church because we get these telemarketing calls at church phone all the time because you had to pick up the phone because it's a church. And you get these telemarketers. And I once made a telemarketer cry. And it was a Christian organization. And her boss called me up and said, you call yourself a pastor? You just made this woman cry, because it was like she was just pushing and pushing. And I thought, all right, I'm done with you. I'm taking off the gloves. And so, and people don't see that side of me because I don't do it much on the internet, but I got that side. And so this woman sent me another email, and it's like, I'm going to tell you exactly why I'm not responding to your email. So then the dude wrote me back. And he says, oh, I totally get it. I understand. I know I'm not Jordan Peterson. I know I'm not John Vervaeke. I know I'm not Grim Grizz. And then I said, if you know Grim Grizz, I will let you on. Because if you don't understand Grim Grizz, there's something essential about this corner that you do not understand. And it's the same with the Freddie and Paul show. And that's why we suffer certain fools. You know, every now and then there's a limit to our suffering, but we do suffer them. And but no, and that's why that's and I think that's, I mean, just listening to Luke's story today, you know, helps me. We so often know things we don't fully know. And listening to Luke's story today is like, this is why I love Luke. This is why I love Luke, because listen to a story. This is how he was formed, and this is why I love you, Chad. This is why I love Grizz. And I mean, you guys were formed in a certain kind of crucible that I totally understand. And Peterson the same way. I mean, even though he was a son of a school teacher, yada yada yada, he at least had that experience and developed those sensibilities. And I think this is deeply important. I think that's part of the reason why this corner is so masculine too.
Mm-hmm. Well, we really like the Telos tea, and we really like to read the Telos tea leaves.
Yeah, so all of this is I agree with you, Paul. Like, hearing the stories of the dads is probably going to be my favorite part of this stream. But I do think I want to share with you. So my parents are very intellectual and smart, and before they had me, they had a dog, and before they had the dog, they read all these books on how to train dogs, and then before they had me, they had all these books on how to train a kid. And so, like, Dr. Dobson, Focus on the Family, that kind of strain, and then some more kind of scientific approaches too. Like, my parents are understand the tables and read the studies type people. But they did such a great job. And so we had these like family rules, and really they were just rules for me and my sister. But rule number one was listen and obey. And then rule number two was no whining. So it was kind of like, it was such a quick hand thing of like, you're breaking rule number two. You know, and the shadow of that is if you want to raise a child to be able to go to their room and handle their own emotions privately, away from the family, then that's what you do. You know, you say, rub some dirt in it when they skin their knee. There's not a lot of emotional openness or tenderness, I guess. And so that's what I wanted to bring up to you guys was like, isn't there this kind of balance or tension, might we say, religio, between that idea of the tough men that our dads and grandfathers are and whatnot, and maybe the more emotionally tender and open side that I think Luke has displayed so well today. There's something, I don't know, like I'm tempted to say that the tender heart is better. Like, it's better to not be tough and to be hurt constantly, to be a man of sorrows. But there's also still something within me that's like, I want to be tough like my dad.
Dude, here's the thing though, you can be, I think what my dad modeled for me, and he didn't do it in a self-aware, conscious way, because like, again, he would only get, which isn't completely true. He would, sorry, I'm breathing hard. I didn't show the push-up cam. Sorry, guys. But he would, my dad's a teddy bear, but yet he's also like the toughest guy that I know. I mean, when I say this, there's probably a degree of it being like my dad's the toughest thing. But like, he really is. Like, I could keep telling you stories to prove it. Like, he is the toughest. He's just hard, but he was also soft. But he just never showed that, because a lot of people don't like my dad, to be honest. I mean, he can be rough with guys. You know, there were guys in my hometown. Like, another story, there was this businessman who was just kind of had a little bit of a cocky air to him, who they didn't get along. They went to high school together. And he was smoking cigarettes. I grew up in a time of smoking a lot of cigarettes, and like the restaurants you could smoke and all that. And him and my dad were having like some disagreement about something. I don't even remember what it was. And at the time he was kind of like smoking, but they were like standing right in his face and just had a cocky look on his face where he was kind of just like, it was like a bowing up without bowing up to my dad. And my dad just like, he slapped the cigarette out of his mouth and was just like, don't start with me. I'll beat the shit out of you. You know, like he's that kind of a guy and my buddy Brigham that I was talking about, shingling, he was like that too at parties. Like guys would come up at parties and like, you know, they fake tough. And like you'd learn pretty quick, and everybody knew in town not to fake tough with Brigham, because like you fake tough, if you would bow up to him, he would just punch you. And then he wouldn't, and he told me explicitly, he's like, if you get in a fight with somebody, you hit them, and then you keep hitting them on the ground until you're sure they're not going to get up. Like he didn't just hit you once, like he took you out. And he would too. So like what I want to try to model, so stories aside, to your point, is I think that is healthy masculinity. Is it's not a denial of the hairy, guttural, like I want to be tough. You can do that, and you should do that. But at the same time, show vulnerability, cry. I mean, that's kind of like, I almost do that. To me, it's almost like a kind of arrogance that I have. It's like I'm confident enough to be vulnerable that I'm just like, what are you going to say? Like, you going to try to fake bro up ego on me? Like, I'll beat you at that game too.
You have to be willing to pay the price for both modes. And
yeah, that's a good way to say
that's
it.
what it really boils down to, because like that, when the voice that comes up that says like, no, don't say nothing because you're not the sheriff, and then you're like, no, something has to be done here. Like, I know that there's a price that's going to be paid, and I'm not going to like it. I never feel like this is going to be an enjoyable experience. But I also feel like, well, this has gone on long enough, you know, and nobody's going to do anything. And then I feel like the biggest piece of shit for like the next week, you know. Like one time I did this. I was in the middle of my AA meeting, and I'm running the Zoom. I'm running the Zoom call because it was like a hybrid meeting, and I'm sick of this fucking Zoom. It's like, it's a big distraction. There's 250 people at this group. It's like, and everybody is coming up to you saying, "Oh, why isn't this? And why isn't that? And why isn't this?" And I'm just like, and then this dude comes up to me. He starts telling me how I need to run this thing, and I'm like, "Dude, I got this." And then he got pissed off at me, and he got real. He's like this old timer. Everybody respects him, and he gets up real close so nobody can hear, and he says, "You're an ungrateful cocksucker." And I'm like, "Oh, you want to whisper this to me? Okay." And I like foolishly told him to fuck off as loud as I can in front of everybody, and they were freaking out. Somebody told me to go home and pray about it. I called her a pretentious bitch, and it was just like not good. And this is only about a year and a half ago. So, you know, like, I still have this problem. I've called I've called people. This one group was, you know, this is kind of in my rigid stage, and I was being called out by somebody in that group, and I fucking called the whole group a bunch of retards, and it was like not good. So, but like, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. There's a price to be paid. That's what I'm trying to say. You have to be willing to pay the price for both of those modes. If you say nothing, you'll have to pay a price for that. So that's my story of being a huge douche, and I have to actually go and do this shower. McMo, email me, brother. Good to see you
Okay.
guys. Love you. Bye.
I get to go to prison now. There's a part of this program is they've got prisoners who train the dogs, and it's a great program because I can imagine for these prisoners, this is just, you know, really amazing if you're a prisoner to get to train dogs, and I bet you it's super healthy for the prisoners. But I got to take my dog down to this prison, and I've had this dog for like 3 months, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna cry like a baby, and I'm gonna have to do it in prison. I tell you, if they're not good to my dog, I'm gonna have problems. I love my dog.
You know, as long as it goes well, you can tell your elders that it was prison ministry. You know,
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. You know, the internet might be you might be, you know, letting a lot of stuff fall because of the TLC responsibilities, but you're still visiting the inmates, you know, in prison. So
Yeah, I
I had
never let her do this. She's not supposed to, you know. Yeah, I know. You have no idea what's coming. You're going to be in jail for a month and a half.
I had a similar story, and honestly, it kind of was the reason I got more involved in TLC stuff. Was, I mean, there's a whole lot of personal things going on in my friend group down in Savannah, but we got a puppy, and then basically at this party, one of my friends was kind of a little rough with our puppy, and I instinctively just hauled off and smacked him on the side of the head. And you know, these are ex-evangelical artsy types, and you know, I'm the artsiest and ex-evangelical of all of them, but it was not kosher, to use another to just mix all of the religious metaphors. It was not kosher for me to apparently display physical violence in that kind of social milieu. So I kind of got put in prison or jail, kind of a minor cancellation event, which led me to this little corner. And just so
There you are.
but yeah, that kind of feeling that Chad's talking about, and the shame involved when you lose your cool and lose your temper, is kind of the inverse of those healthy tears almost. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
you can kind of see the good way to handle those intense emotions and the bad way to handle them. You know, Christ is bleeding, sweating blood, and then the first opportunity Peter has, he wants to take blood, kind of a thing, you know? So
it's
that's the
interesting.
struggle, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like with my dad, his dad was likewise a burly man, right? So my dad is a Mason. My dad's dad was a Mason. My dad's dad was a Mason, right? And I'm like, they're all named Henry, right? Senior, junior, the third, and then Christian, you know? And I'm like, yeah, would have been kind of cool, you know? But anyway, so my dad's dad was manly man and show no emotion kind of thing, right? And he he had an alcohol problem. My dad is a recovering alcoholic, and so my dad raising me, it was like a pendulum swing thing, right? So he was like trying to bring me up as a father that he wished he had, like he wished his dad was more, you know, supportive and caring and all that stuff, you know. And but my dad, like, he couldn't not be a man at the same time, right? so he is this like teddy bear, but also masculine man. And it's the funniest thing because he's also a child. It's like people get a kick out of it. So usually on a job site, he's usually the foreman at this point now because he's like 60 something years old. So he's a foreman on a site. And you know, the guys, anyone who gets assigned to like his site loves working with my dad. They love it because he'll get stuff done. Like he's got that work ethic thing. Like you better be on time. You better be working. Like when I was like 13 or whatever, and I first went on a job site with him, and I made the mistake of putting my hands in my pockets while I was waiting for the next thing to do. He was like, you playing pocket pool? Like, what are you doing? You know? I'm like, huh? I don't know, you know, because all I knew was my teddy bear. You know, all I knew was that side of him. So then when I got to actually get out in the field with him, I'm like, oh, like it was scary, but at the same time, I was like, yeah, my dad really is a badass. Like this is great, you know. And there was a time, I think I was 16 at this point. We were actually he was with the union at that time. So I was illegally on a union site, 16, and I was always ever just a laborer, right? So I would get the block, get the brick, mix the mortar, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I was shoveling mortar from a wheelbarrow up into people's mortar pans. They were just like one scaffolding level up, so it wasn't like, didn't make sense obviously to like grab mud, climb up there. So there's a technique you can use, and but at 16 years old you don't quite have the technique, you know, down too well. And so I splashed the one guy, right? And you know, expletives flew from his mouth and stuff like that. And unfortunately for him, my dad was nearby, and I thought he was gonna kill the guy. I was terrified because I thought my dad was going to kill the guy, because the guy was, in my dad's eyes, because of him being my father and because of his childhood, he just sees, probably his dad bullying him as a child kind of thing, and so he just saw red, stormed up there, just like essentially jumped up the freaking scaffolding and like grabbed the guy. And I was just like, no, I think it's my fault. Like, I kind of messed up, whatever. And yet, like, the cool thing though, right, is watching as the day unfolds, my dad and that guy like reconciling. By the time the shift is over, they were fine. You know what I mean? And it's like, that kind of sticks with me. But I wanted to relate this to the whole angry father thing, right? And having this like anger outbursts, because I'm certainly prone to them myself, and I have 2 kids, and they're both daughters, and so I certainly don't want to like, I don't want to scar them or anything like that, and I do my best to, it's pretty easy to recognize when an anger outburst is about to happen, but it's like how early that recognition comes,
right? Yeah.
Determines how I end up acting, and of course, there's been plenty of times that I've failed, and thank God I've never called them like names or anything like that, but just like raising my voice like to the extreme over the stupidest thing, right? And then afterwards, one of the things my wife and I agree upon and really insist on is eventually, like, if we catch ourselves doing that, not in the moment, but like later on that day, we'll apologize. Yeah. Essentially, like, we'll explain, like, hey, like, listen, what you did was, this is the reason why I yelled. I didn't need to yell the way I yelled, and I'm sorry. I'm sure, daughter will be like, it just really scared me to hurt my feelings, and it definitely sucks. But there's I'm not going to excuse it and call it a good thing that I do those things, but they can be used for good. Like the fact that my wife and I are willing to do this sort of reparations piece on our behalf. Yeah. Later in the day, I feel like that's modeling something even more important, maybe, than if I had not yelled in the first place.
Totally, man. Humility, repentance.
That makes me think something that I think Luke is really going to like, which is that, like, I think in all of these stories, you have the strength of the father being the weakness of the father, or the weakness of the father being the father's strength. Mm-hmm. That kind of coincidence of opposites, the juicy girl country stuff. But yeah, because I get this sense when you hear all these stories from everyone's dad, that like you really are getting a piece of them. Like, we understand ourselves by thinking about how we were raised. And so when you hear stories of the types of people that raised the person you're talking to, it's like this instant depth of personal knowing. It's very, very interesting.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's all tied to the little corner stuff and randos and PVK's thing. It's, you have to, and my personalist knowing, like, you won't, this has happened to me a lot, because my first impressions with people are usually much different than my long-standing relationships with people. Like, I usually come across in a way that is very different than people who've known me a long time. But that's because you don't know me at all. You're judging a book by its cover, but like, you got to read the book. You got to know the person. So, yeah. Hey, so guys, I'm probably about ready to call it. You guys ready to call it, or?
I got to get back to work. Yeah. Don't tell anyone I was here.
Okay. I won't let them know. But thank you. Yeah. See, Almond Tree knows. Jason, I come across cool at first, but then. All right. Thank you for coming. I guess this just turned out to be dad talk, but anyhow, it's good. Peace out, guys.
My dad could beat up all your dads.